Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
Hello. Marcus. You told me. That echo in my big empty room. Sorry about that.
That's all right. You got a new flat, which is awesome. And a house, a flat, I haven't seen it yet, but there's echo. You don't have to fake it.
Okay. So I don't have to make the echo. It actually has echo. Okay, fine.
Double echo, there you go.
Enough of my echoing in my own voice. Who's on the show today?
Today we have Milan Guenther and his book Enterprise Design Patterns, which is all about enterprise design, a very interesting newish kind of practice. So we talk a lot about that, what it is, what it can do, what it can't, and a couple of examples. So a lovely chat. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, as I told you kind of before we started recording earlier today, a lot of the book I found to be kind of very familiar because it's how I engage a lot with a lot of my clients, which was really kind of positive and reinforcing. A couple of interesting takeaways where we were talking about how enterprise design sometimes can illustrate through maps and through vision where there are frictions that are causing waste or causing kind of friction with customer journeys. And he pointed out that there are two kinds. One is one is omission and one is commission. I mean, if a system is simply inefficient because it's been poorly designed or hasn't been updated, that's omission. But sometimes people introduce friction into processes intentionally, and that's kind of a business process. He used the magic word ethics. Do you actually want to bring ethics into enterprise design? And it made me really kind of flinch. The other map he talked about was a map of conflict and influence. Okay, if I map out an organization and I see all the different people, I know who's in conflict with whom and who has the influence and the power. And I said, that's an interesting concept and probably pretty valuable, but it's also pretty dangerous. His feedback was, you've got to burn it before it burns you. And I loved that as a comment. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, burn after reading. The what I took away from it is because I was obviously asking him as mainly a service designer myself or design thinker, where are the overlaps between all these three things? There's enterprise design, there's enterprise architecture, there's service design, and we're all doing similar things, different tools and things. And I was just asking, so what do we need, right? This is all probably confusing to anyone who has a company of small, medium, or large size. Which to hire and where and whatnot. Do we need all of it? And he said, well, actually, you need none of it. Because a lot of things you can do. And he didn't use the word common sense, but there's a lot of things in thinking and, that you can do yourself. And some companies are successful without it, but some very much benefit from it. And some of the things, from my interpretation, are sort of interchangeable. And therefore, it doesn't matter as long as you consider, I think. And I like that because in a lot of my projects, I've seen this where we had people with no design background, with no even business analytical background. They would be able to go there and go to customers and ask the right questions and do that really well and point out amazing value for the company and point out problems weren't problems, but there are other problems they should rather address of way higher value. So I quite like the idea that you don't have to be labeled as a practitioner to do so, and you can actually often do it with the people you already have in your organization, but you should consider it because it's a smart thing to do. So the guidelines and the exercises and the patterns in the book are really great, and I love the idea that you don't have to be a practitioner for that in order to apply it. So I quite like that one.
Excellent. We've done some really, really great interviews over the last, so many episodes. It was nice to hear him say in kind of the after we stopped recording, he likes the fact that I bring one lens and you bring another lens with service design, a little bit of enterprise design, and then adding wicked problems into it. So well done us, and hopefully we can get more great authors. But before I kind of big us up anymore, let's go talk to Milan.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Milan Guenther. Hello, Milan, and thank you for being with us.
Hi, it's a pleasure.
So, as usual, we start at the top. So, please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
So I'm Milan. I am one of the founding partners of Enterprise Design Associates, a small consultancy that I created with a few friends in 2009. Um, and we do what we call enterprise design, mainly out of a frustration that we had as people with a design background, is that most um, things we did never really saw the light of the day because the enterprises we worked with had trouble or were trouble doing executing on any of these things. And so we came up with this idea, to make the enterprise itself subject and part of the design. So that gave birth to the consultancy, then also to my first book, Intersection. Then we started a conference series of the same name in 2014, going around Europe. And then 2 years ago, we joined forces with Wolfgang, who is an enterprise architect by trade, and merged with his association, the Architectural Thinking Association, to create the Intersection Group. And that's, I think, the capacity in which I'm here today, you could say, like as a one of the two presidents of that group. So we want to help people create better enterprises. And the way to do that is the topic of the book that you mentioned, so the Enterprise Design Patterns book. So I guess we wrote it to, to help people do that.
It seems like when I read the book, and it was a really easy, quick read, and as I said kind of before we started recording, it felt very familiar. But it's not a classic business book. It's almost an instruction manual. Is that how you intended it?
Kind of. So the inspiration for the book came from a keynote we had at the Intersection conference in Lisbon, actually. Um, so we had a keynote, Takashi Iba from a Japanese university, and his work is patterns. Like he's looking into patterns. He created pattern languages for things like project management, but also cooking and social processes and so on. And he basically he takes any topic and creates patterns out of that, or pattern languages. So listening to that, Wolfgang was actually very inspired and said, we need a pattern language for what we do. And the beauty of it is it's at the same time very concrete, like you said, an instruction manual. Like you find yourself in this situation, do that. Then what and then you can expect this and that to come out of that. But on the other hand, it's because it comes from the Christopher Alexander kind of tradition. It's also quite open to be flexed and interpreted and adjusted and adapted to whatever context you are actually in, because the patterns don't give you they are not tools. They are not as concrete as tools. So you can kind of go about implementing the pattern as you want.
Okay, and then I just recently got the title of being enterprise architect for the project that I'm working on. I've never had that particular title before. And the more I learn about it, the more I think it actually fits the work that I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. But what do you mean about enterprise architecture? How do you define enterprise design? Just so every one of our listeners can have a basis for understanding before we go too much further, because I think it's a relatively new idea.
Yeah. So the we have these two terms, right? We have enterprise architecture and we have enterprise design. When people ask me to define enterprise design, which is what we use to describe what we are doing, I pull off a cheap trick and I steal from another keynoter we had from Lou Down. Um, they were talking about defining service design and said, well, it's the design of services. So I'm doing the same now. I'm saying it's the design of enterprises, and it's because it's because enterprises, as you know, enterprises are playing a big role in people's lives. You know, we are their customers, we are their employees, their investors, sometimes their neighbors, and that role is not always great. You know, the relationship is not always without problems. So we think that there's a big room for improvement. And I would say so. So that's the aim. It's to make enterprises um, better according to whatever criteria you use to judge whether they are better or worse. Um, Now, enterprise architecture is I would say it's a field that is older and more established and growing out of a kind of an operational and engineering based view of enterprises. And that's a key ingredient that we use to design better enterprises. But then there are others, like, for example, customer and employee experience design, service design that I already mentioned, product design, the whole topic of what we call identity. So the purpose, the culture, the mission, the vision, these kind of things. And if you just ignore those, or you kind of see them as out of scope because they are not part of your enterprise architecture or service design or product design um, scope, there's a risk that this comes back to bite you later when you see whatever you came up with might require a change to these elements.
So when I look at that, and so I come from a background of design thinking, service design mainly, but I also have worked on a really nice big project over at BT IT with a lot of enterprise architects. So that was my first experience with their different tools and approach, and the difference between service design, enterprise architecture, and some are a bit more on the qualitative side of things, some are more on the quantitative side of things. And it was a really interesting experience. And I think that's sort of where my question then goes is, so between all of that, it feels there's a big overlap on, and service design is moving a bit into that where enterprise architecture was there before, which is internal processes of a company or organization. The people, how they work together in order to produce products and services, which is sometimes part of what a service designer does or a product designer. Um, and as an enterprise architect, they often seem to talk about value, which can be internal or external. Where do you see sort of, I think you talked a little bit about the overlap with enterprise design. If I take those three, maybe it's a two-part question then. Does a company need all three? And where would they sort of sit in a typical structure, maybe, or project?
Marcus, because you tend to ramble, would you remind everybody who's listening what three you're talking about so we all know?
Service design, enterprise architecture, and enterprise design.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for following.
Right. So I would actually say a company needs none of those. Strictly speaking, I think you can have a successful company without any of those. It's a bit like when you when you create a pizza shop or something, you can hire a graphic designer for your logo. You can also draw it in word art. And there are chances that your pizza shop will be successful without the graphic designer. Um, and I think that's true. That's kind of what marks out a design discipline. It's one of the traits of a design discipline is that um, you know um, it's optional but very helpful in certain circumstances. Now the question is, which of them do you need? Do you need all three? Do you need maybe two or one? So I would say, if you are in the service business, or if the service design is a big challenge for you because your product has a lot of aspects of a service, or maybe it is a service, then service design would definitely help, and you should invest in having that capability. if your business has a certain degree of complexity that could benefit from the engineering, the analysis, and um, the modeling and visualizing of all those structures that make it work, yeah, get an enterprise architect to do that, or a business architect. There are nuances in these disciplines, of course. You have also product design, organization design, and so on. So the idea of enterprise design is actually to look at, that's why at the heart of the model that we are using in Intersection Group is what we call the enterprise design facets, is a collection of facets of enterprises, basically the fabric of enterprises, and you determine based on your challenge, your context, and your environment, which of these facets might be the most worthwhile looking into in depth, which one of you should just merely maybe consider but not ignore. Um, and that determines also the scope and the angle that you take for an enterprise design approach. And the idea is also that you connect, for example, if you have a service designer working on the experience and the of interacting with the service and be useful to customers, and you have an enterprise architect working on, making the service actually work and operate and deliver and include contingency plans and continuity and compliance and all of these things. Where do they intersect? What kind of decision in the service design will have a direct or maybe indirect impact on the architecture, and the other way around? And we find that most problems that enterprises experience or create are actually due to the fact that these dependencies, these links, are unknown or ignored, and it has to do with silos, right? Because maybe those different disciplines work in different silos. But yeah, to answer your question, I think very strictly speaking, all of that is really not needed. But it might
Okay.
be.
So let's pick up on one word that you talked about, and that word is problem.
Mhm.
And I'm going to look at that from an enterprise perspective. Too many enterprises don't know or aren't willing to admit that they've got a problem.
Mhm.
And some enterprises recognize there's a problem and don't know what to do about it. So enterprise design can be used to fix problems, but only if people want to have them fixed. They can
Right.
use it to, evolve in a changing market if they feel that there are things that are happening in the market or in the competitive space. And that's kind of where I see a lot of it working. But how, as an external, can you really help somebody redo their enterprise? Can you
Mhm.
do that as an external consultant, or do you need to be inside the machine to be able to really affect change?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a classic, uh, because many designers and some architects that we have in our community are actually working for consultancies, right? Or maybe also for themselves as independent. And um, it's true that for large organizations, the kind of change that we are talking about usually takes a lot of time, involves a lot of people, involves a lot of tough decisions. And so we see that actually people are right now sometimes changing from the consultancy side to internal roles. Maybe exactly because of that. We also see sometimes the other way around, because some people get frustrated after 10 years in one organization, want to see something else, want to bring their knowledge into different environments and change to the other side. Um, as we suggest in the pattern book, I don't actually think the side that you're on makes the complete difference. It's rather, as you said before, do you actually recognize the problem as what it is, or do you see a nail because you're used to hammering? And if you do see the problem, or if you are open to actually explore the problem, on its in its own right, and consider different perspectives. Like, what if we look at this from a people perspective, from a number perspective, from an experience perspective, from a purpose, identity, where do we want to go perspective, or from an architecture perspective? Then, well, our experience is that if you manage to do so, it actually doesn't matter so much whether you do that as an internal or as an external. In the end, the enterprise always has to transform itself. And it involves, even if you're internal, it will involve many more people than just yourself.
I think then that naturally probably leads us to the next question, which is then about commitment, right? And I literally just had the conversation today with a client about, you know, he sees the problem, they know what they want to do, but one of the things he explained quite easily was, I see that, you see that, we both are in agreement, we understand it, but higher up or in that area over here where we're affected by projects and decisions, he doesn't know if they perceive the problem in the same way, if they even see one, you know.
Hmm.
How do you then how do you either convince clients that when you get the opportunity to have a look at it, convince them of that the problem is significant enough to do something about it, or how do you, what often I think comes in is that the response is, yeah, well, we don't quite have time to do that because there's a lot of other small things we have to fix first. Where does the big restructure or reimagining have space? When do you feel? What's the right situation, you think? Are there any markers, any indicators on these kind of things in your experience to when a company is at the right place for those kind of step backs and addressing this and commitment?
Well, the first thing I wanna say is that doing enterprise design does not necessarily mean reshaping the entire enterprise, right? It could be that you just find a very, very specific intervention on a few, like you find a very specific cause and effect chain, for example, or dynamic that you want to change. And the process of enterprise, or the idea of enterprise design, is to look at all the parts and from all the perspectives that are potentially relevant in order to find these, and actually in order to be very on point and very specific on what the intervention then would be like or would do. And so I think one of the goals is actually that we touch only little, or we touch only a few parts of the enterprise in order to have a big effect, or a big impact. And the idea is to help people do that. Now, with that in mind, it's kind of inevitable that if you work with a certain stakeholder, or in the book we use the term co-creator of the enterprise. Let's say you work with IT. It's a classic for the enterprise architects. They would like to be outside IT, but they are inside IT. Will not be able to change that for this project or this problem. So what do we do? Maybe we find that the actual problem we try to solve would be better looked at from a people perspective, like for example, an organization or an incentivation point of view. But that's the purview of HR. So what do we do? And there, so two things. If there's enough urgency of the problem, like sense of urgency, and if there's a culture of actually openly discussing these kind of problems or challenges, and bringing each other's perspectives into the room, then that is a golden opportunity actually for doing some enterprise design. Because you can just reach out to HR. Some techniques that you might know that we use, like get some evidence through research, make visualizations, run some sprints where we ask people to deliberately, bring their knowledge but leave their hat at the door, so that they are part of one team instead of representatives of some role on some board and so on. So I think that's then actually the job of the, be it an internal or external um, designer, is to make this process happen, um, and and create this, or help create this culture, help bring it about.
Okay. And part of the book that I really resonated with was your focus on asking the right questions, asking them in a safe place, and taking time to listen and focusing on listening, because it's really, really important. And it leads up to one of the other points that has its own pattern of tangible presence. And I bring that up because we are now in COVID times. We're no longer in 100% remote working. We're moving towards hybrid working. How, in your experience, or what is your advice to companies who need to build tangible presence, to build those relationships of trust, to have those open communications, to have those safe spaces in the days of hybrid working?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of our co-authors, Annika, she invented a mapping technique called the Milky Way, which we're using extensively. It's an enterprise map. And one of the very first tricks she taught us is to print this map on A0 and put it all over the office so that people start seeing it. People start, seeing themselves on it, because it's basically showing what the enterprise is doing over and over again, and start using this shared reference, shared geography. And that's one implementation of that pattern. Now, if your enterprise is not meeting anymore in the office, that won't work. Um, so what we then need to actually do is to find digital equivalents of hanging that picture everywhere. And it's not always easy. Um, uh, but we worked actually with some clients that have been already remote before the pandemic. And usually there are these equivalents. There are certain chat rooms, certain intranet pages, certain events or webinars, or these kind of, like, where the senior leadership is talking to everyone, like all hands meetings and so on. Surveys that are being sent around regularly. So and this, I think, what we can borrow from service design there again. Find the touch points and use them.
So taking on from the Milky Way as a large visual, you talk about different kinds of maps. Uh,
Hmm.
you had one particular kind of map that was a conflict and influence map that you referenced in the book. And I
Hmm.
was like, that's an incredibly powerful, but it's an incredibly dangerous thing to actually write down. Because if you actually write down what's happening in the politics and somebody finds it, it could be really, really dangerous. So I loved it, but it made me nervous.
Yeah, you kind
The
of
other
have
one,
to.
go
Sorry,
on.
you have to kind of burn it before it burns you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The other one, a map can reveal how broken processes can waste providers and consumers time and money. But you know what? I know too many businesses that actually embrace that,
Hmm.
because wasted money from a consumer is profit to an enterprise. They actually create bad services and bad user experience. They intentionally induce friction. And what
Hmm.
I'm talking about is, like, you have to actually phone somebody to unsubscribe from a news service. You can sign up online all day, but if you want to get out of that service, there's no online get out. You've got to phone somebody. So, what do you do when you run into a situation where you clearly see this is a horrible user experience, but somebody in the executive suite says, yeah, but it's profitable?
Yeah, it's you're touching on a very fundamental problem there, or issue, which is the role of enterprises in individuals' lives, and also for society and for the planet. And uh, yeah, I think a lot of the problems enterprises cause today are actually so yeah, they're actually so we had a brilliant enterprise architect. Sorry, I'm sidetracking here. Len Feskens, who he uh, chunked the problems that we have when architecting or designing great enterprises into two categories: problems of commission and problems of omission. So problems of omission, I think, are very common. So that's the case, when like I don't know, you have to deal with an insurance. You want to make a claim, and that claim is incredibly hard to make. It might just be that it's exactly the kind of problem that we were talking about before. The organization design doesn't fit the IT architecture, doesn't fit the operating model, doesn't fit the experience design, and so on. So it's incoherence, it's omission, and it's no one's intentional, like no one is to blame really. It's more like the system broke down at some point. Then you have commission, right? So, and that's what you were talking about. Like we make like the claims process should be difficult because we don't want people to file claims because then we have to pay. And um, well, I think it draws upon the very fundamental questions of ethics in design. Is that something?
Ethics.
Yes.
Oh,
is that
okay.
something? Is that something that you want to work on?
Yeah.
Do you care? Do you try to improve it from within? Do you challenge it? And it so I teach at some schools on enterprise design, which is very rewarding because you get into touch with young people that ask themselves exactly these kind of questions. And one of my classes at Sciences Po here in Paris, I asked a few times in a row, every year, um, should Philip Morris still exist according to you? And you always get three answers. You get no, they are harmful to the planet, harmful to society, and they like our job, if any, as enterprise designers, would kind of hospice service, help them die gracefully. Um, then some people say yes because I smoke. It would be hypocritical of me to say no, they shouldn't exist, and at the same time smoke. And then there are some who say, yeah, but they need to change. And the thing is, if you go to the website today, and I'm realizing I'm making advertising for Philip Morris here, which I shouldn't, um, you will find that their vision, mission, and so on, blah, blah, now changed to smoke free future. That's what they say. That's the purpose of the enterprise. Now, if you believe that, different question, up to you. But I think this is kind of this illustrates, I think, the richness of your question is yeah, what do you want to spend your time on, and do we really want to work on these enterprises? And then there's some hope, of course, that, for example, the transparency that is introduced by having customer reviews on every product everywhere um, might lead some people to complain about the claims process, and might lead some people to then choose another insurer, and might influence the market to kind of punish that insurer in question to for their fault by commission that they introduced into the customer experience and that annoyed you then in the end.
Yeah. I think it's a thing that came up quite a couple of times in some of the episodes we had. Whenever we talk about either people or empathy or purpose of companies, you eventually end up at the short-term shareholder value increase and why this is still a thing because it doesn't seem to serve society at all.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's definitely, I think, a conversation we're probably going to be having over the next couple of years for sure. But we always have more questions than we have time, so I'll ask the last one, which is, can you give us one example of sort of a one of your favorite examples of where enterprise design worked really well, maybe on a company that you know or that you heard of or something, to give us a great positive example where this currently goes in terms of direction and what sort of a best practice on that.
Yeah. So first, I want to say that the doing enterprise design, you can very well do it without um, being or calling yourself an enterprise designer or following a certain kind of methodology or something like that. It basically just means you design everything you think is relevant to create a better enterprise. And as we just discussed, what better actually means is kind of up to you and up to the other co-creators involved. That being said, so I think there's a lot of implicit enterprise design that might be labeled enterprise architecture or service design or product design or organization design or even maybe business consulting. Um, I, um, I I was thinking about this question from your brief, and so I basically had two options. One is referring to some case where I just assume it's enterprise design, and obviously it helped doing something because that company is thriving and they are obviously better now. Or should I talk about one of my experiences? I decided to do the latter because it's quite difficult to judge from the outside, what in the end led to some company's success. Um, but yeah, so I worked with a large automotive company, and for me, so enterprise design usually means pushing boundaries. So maybe you are briefed or hired as to look only at the operations or only at the customer experience or only at the product, and you find this is not working. In the book, this is called the focus shift refocus pattern. You find yourself stuck, and you need to shift focus, embrace another facet, maybe include, engage other stakeholders, other people, and in the end, enlarge your influence. And so in this particular project, we were hired as, you could say, if I'm a little bit um, not evil, if I'm a little bit, but maybe you cut this one out.
No worries,
Let
I'm
me start
cutting.
again. Um, so in this project, we were originally briefed as experience designers, but the actual scope was what you could call exhibition design.
Mhm.
So they were running a major transformation change initiative, lots of groups working on different topics. And what they actually thought experienced designers could add to this was design an exhibition in the like a road show to show the results to everyone, get everyone involved and everyone engaged. Um, and but they did not actually think of including experience design for any of you know, the actual transformation, like what would then actually lead to the employee experience or uh, by ultimately reaching the customer experience of someone buying a car. um, and we managed through the process to actually ask the right questions, raise challenges, and shift the focus to in the end have the scope of several design sprint workshops treating things like how can we better design career paths for certain people? How can we have a better patenting process in the R&D department? How can we um, what's the future of our company in a world where people don't own a car anymore, and so on. So and these were like enterprise design challenges. But this is kind of the, I would say, the success was that then some of these challenges were actually answered and validated. The solution concept came out and implemented, and the whole approach of that company changed from being very planning oriented to being more creative and more collaborative, which actually was the original brief of the original transformation project. So I cite that as a success that I witnessed.
It sounds like successful enterprise design via the back door. It's
Yes.
like they asked you to build a Hollywood set. And in the process of building the Hollywood set, you actually help them change the company underneath. So that's really, really great that you built the relationships within the organization to affect real and substantial change, not just that superficial change. Milan, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for your input and your insights. One last question. You've written 2 books. This is your second book. Is there a third book coming?
There might be, I'm not sure if I will be one of the authors, but one of the goals we have with the intersection group, with the association, is to, bring the knowledge of our members to the world. So I'm sure there will be more books, and I might even be tempted to join the authors.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Have a great evening in Paris, and we'll see you later.
All right. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.